Mark Tilbury or Millionaire Power, don't hold cash in 2026. That statement alone will make careful people uncomfortable. It should. Cash feels safe. It feels responsible. It feels like discipline. But safety and discipline are not the same thing. And in the coming environment, confusing them will quietly erode portfolios while people believe they are being cautious. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Cash is only neutral when the system is stable. When inflation, policy, and capital flows are shifting, cash becomes an active decision to accept decay, not dramatic collapse. Slow, invisible decay, the kind that doesn't trigger panic but guarantees underperformance. Most people won't notice it until years have passed and purchasing power has quietly slipped away. Serious investors understand this. They do not ask whether cash feels safe. They ask what cash is doing. Is it compounding or is it standing still while everything else moves? In 2026, standing still is not conservative. It is a position with consequences. The next phase of the global economy will not reward comfort. It will reward structure. Capital will move toward assets, businesses, and systems that are positioned, adaptable, and productive. Cash, by itself, does none of those things. It waits, and waiting has a cost. Most portfolios fail not because of bad investments, but because of passive decisions, holding cash too long, waiting for clarity that never arrives, delaying action in the name of prudence. This is how disciplined people slowly fall behind more prepared ones. This conversation is not about chasing returns. It is not about speculation. It is about understanding that capital must have a role. Every dollar should be assigned a job, a timeline, and a purpose. Cash without intent is not strategy. It is avoidance. There is also a psychological cost to excessive cash. It trains hesitation. It reinforces the habit of watching instead of positioning. Over time, this mindset weakens decision-making. Opportunities are seen, analyzed, and then missed. Not because they were bad, but because comfort delayed commitment. This is rarely discussed, but it matters. In 2026, markets will not move in straight lines. Volatility will punish emotional reactions and reward calm allocation. Those who treat cash as a long-term holding will find themselves reacting late, buying higher, and wondering why discipline didn't protect them. High-level operators think differently. They separate liquidity from cash hoarding. They maintain access to capital, but they do not leave it idle. Liquidity is a tool. Cash is raw material. Leaving raw material unused is not intelligent management. If you are still holding large amounts of cash because it feels responsible, this message is for you, not to scare you, to sharpen your thinking, because the real risk in 2026 is not loss. It is stagnation disguised as safety. Wealth is preserved by anticipation, not reaction. Those who wait for certainty usually pay a premium for it. Those who prepare early control risk quietly. This requires accepting controlled discomfort now to avoid permanent weakness later. Cash feels peaceful, but peace without progress is expensive. Mature investors choose measured movement over stillness, even when headlines are unclear and opinions are divided. That choice defines outcomes over entire market cycles globally. By the end of this framework, you will understand why holding cash is a decision, not a default. You will see how disciplined investors reposition without panic, without noise, and without abandoning long-term principles. This is not about prediction, it is about preparation. Stay focused. The difference between those who preserve wealth and those who slowly lose it is not intelligence, it is structure. And structure always beats comfort. Separate liquidity needs from long-term capital allocation. Most people treat cash as a single category. That is the first mistake. Intelligent capital management begins by separating money that must remain liquid from money that is meant to grow over time. When these two roles are mixed, decision-making becomes emotional, defensive, and inefficient. Liquidity is not wealth. Liquidity is access. It exists to reduce stress, preserve optionality, and protect you from being forced into bad decisions at the wrong time. Rent, payroll, operating expenses, emergency reserves, and short-term obligations all require liquidity. That money has a job already. Its purpose is stability, not growth. Once that role is defined and fully funded, it should be left alone and not confused with investment capital. Long-term capital serves a completely different function. Its purpose is to compound, to absorb volatility and to be exposed to productive risk over time. Treating this capital as if it needs to remain perfectly safe at all times destroys its effectiveness. Growth capital must be allowed to move, fluctuate, and work through cycles. When investors demand liquidity from money that should be compounding, they end up with neither safety nor growth. The disciplined approach is simple but rarely followed. First, calculate your true liquidity requirement, not what feels comfortable, but what is realistically necessary. This includes fixed expenses, variable buffers, and a margin for uncertainty. Once this number is established, stop increasing it emotionally. Excess liquidity beyond this point is not protection, it is hesitation. Next, mentally and structurally separate long-term capital. This money should not be checked daily. It should not be evaluated emotionally. It should not be pulled back into cash every time headlines change. Long-term capital must be governed by rules, timelines, and allocation logic, not feelings. When markets move, your plan should already exist. In 2026, this separation becomes even more critical. Economic transitions increase noise. Noise triggers overreactions. Investors who have not separated liquidity from growth capital panic because every dollar feels exposed. Investors who have done the work remain calm because their short-term security is already handled. This clarity also improves opportunity execution. When liquidity is defined, you know exactly how much capital can be deployed without endangering your lifestyle or operations. Decisions become cleaner. You stop asking, what if something happens? Because that risk has already been accounted for. This is how professionals operate. Another benefit is psychological discipline. Mixing liquidity and long-term capital trains fear-based behavior. Separating them trains confidence. You stop hovering over markets. You stop freezing during volatility. You stop confusing temporary drawdowns with permanent loss. This shift alone improves performance more than most strategies. Separating these roles does not mean eliminating cash. It means assigning cash a clear purpose and refusing to let it drift into inertia. Liquidity should be boring and predictable. Long-term capital should be structured and intentional. When each dollar knows its role, the portfolio becomes resilient instead of reactive. High-level wealth is not built by avoiding risk. It is built by controlling where risk is allowed to exist. Separating liquidity from long-term capital is the foundation of that control. Without it, every market cycle feels threatening. With it, volatility becomes manageable and capital works quietly in the background. Actly as it should. Reassign idle cash into productive, risk-managed assets. Idle cash is often mistaken for patience. In reality, it is usually unstructured capital waiting without a plan. Productive investors do not allow money to sit without a defined role. Every unit of capital must either provide stability or generate return. Anything in between is inefficiency disguised as caution. The first step is acknowledging that cash, by itself, produces nothing. It does not adapt to inflation, policy shifts, or market cycles. Its value is fixed while the environment around it changes. Over time, this gap compounds quietly against the holder. Reassigning idle cash is not about chasing opportunity. It is about restoring balance between safety and productivity. Productive assets are not speculative assets. They are vehicles designed to work over time, even when conditions are imperfect. These include businesses, cash flow generating investments, diversified market exposure, and assets with pricing power. The common trait is not volatility, but contribution. Productive assets do something. They earn, adjust, or compound. Risk management begins before allocation, not after. This means setting boundaries, time horizon, acceptable drawdown, liquidity constraints, and purpose must be defined before capital is deployed. Investors who skip this step feel exposed because they are exposed. Those who define risk in advance experience volatility as noise, not threat. Reassignment should be gradual and intentional. Large emotional moves from cash into assets create timing risk. Controlled deployment reduces regret and increases consistency. This approach also prevents the common mistake of waiting endlessly for the right moment, which often arrives only after prices have moved. Another critical discipline is diversification by function, not by label. Owning multiple assets that Respond the same way to economic stress is not diversification. Productive reassignment spreads exposure across different drivers, growth, income, protection, and optionality. Each plays a role. None are held by accident. In 2026, capital efficiency will matter more than raw returns. Investors who simply sit in cash waiting for clarity will find that clarity is priced in by the time they act. Those who reassign capital early, with risk controls, benefit from positioning rather than reaction. This is not about being early, it's about being prepared. Reassigning idle cash also forces better thinking. It requires understanding why you own something, not just what you own. This clarity eliminates impulsive trades and replaces them with structured decisions. Over time, portfolios become simpler, not more complex. There is also a behavioral advantage. Cash creates the illusion of optionality, but often results in paralysis. Productive allocation restores momentum. Decisions feel deliberate. Confidence increases because capital is aligned with strategy, not fear. Importantly, reassignment does not mean abandoning liquidity entirely. It means minimizing waste. Some cash remains operational, the rest must earn its place. Money that is not working is quietly losing relevance in a changing system. Experienced investors respect cash, but they do not worship it. They understand its role and its limits. In 2026, holding large amounts of idle cash is not conservative. It is inefficient. Reassigning that capital into productive, risk-managed assets is not aggressive. It is responsible. Wealth preservation is not achieved by freezing capital. It is achieved by deploying it intelligently, with discipline, boundaries, and patience. When cash is reassigned with intent, portfolios stop waiting and start working. Prioritize inflation-resistant vehicles over nominal safety. Nominal S. AFTI is comforting, but it is often misleading. When investors say they want safety, what they usually mean is stability of numbers, not stability of purchasing power. These are not the same thing. In an inflationary or structurally shifting environment, protecting nominal value while ignoring real value is a quiet way to lose ground. Inflation does not need to be extreme to cause damage. Even moderate, persistent inflation compounds against idle or low-yield capital over time. The danger is not visible day to day. It reveals itself years later when the same amount of money buys less optionality, fewer assets, and reduced freedom. Investors who focus only on nominal preservation often discover this too late. Inflation-resistant vehicles are not about speculation. They are about alignment. These assets possess the ability to adjust, reprice, or compound in ways that maintain relevance as costs rise. The defining characteristic is adaptability. When the economic environment changes, these assets respond rather than remain fixed. Businesses with pricing power are a clear example. When input costs increase, well-positioned businesses can adjust pricing without destroying demand. This preserves margins and, over time, value. Investors who understand this favor enterprises that control their destiny rather than those dependent on static conditions. Real assets often serve a similar function. Assets tied to tangible utility or essential services tend to move with the cost environment rather than against it. Their value is not abstract. It is connected to demand, replacement cost, and real-world function. This connection provides resilience when monetary value shifts. Market-based instruments can also be inflation-resistant when structured correctly. Broad exposure to productive economies, rather than narrow bets, allows capital to benefit from overall growth and adapt. While prices fluctuate, ownership in productive systems historically outpaces the erosion caused by inflation over long periods. The key distinction is this: nominal safety protects numbers on a statement. Inflation resistance protects economic reality. One looks stable, the other remains powerful. Confusing the two leads to portfolios that appear intact but gradually lose strategic strength. In 2026, inflation dynamics will not be uniform. Some sectors will adapt quickly, others will lag. Capital that is positioned only for stability will struggle to keep up with these shifts. Capital positioned for adaptability will experience volatility, but also preservation of relevance. This requires mental discipline. Inflation-resistant assets do not always feel safe in the short term. Their values move. Headlines fluctuate. This discomfort causes many investors to retreat back to cash or fixed instruments, mistaking calmness for protection. Over long horizons, this choice is costly. Another overlooked aspect is opportunity cost. Capital locked into nominally safe positions cannot be redeployed easily without loss of momentum. Inflation-resistant vehicles maintain optionality because they remain integrated in the economic system. They are easier to rebalance, leverage, or transition as conditions evolve. Prioritizing inflation resistance also forces better evaluation standards. Investors must analyze how value is created, maintained, and transferred. This eliminates lazy thinking and encourages ownership over speculation. Portfolios become intentional rather than reactive. This does not mean eliminating all nominally safe assets. It means limiting their role. They serve as anchors, not engines. Engines must move with the environment, not resist it. High-level capital management is about realism, not comfort. Inflation is not an anomaly. It is a structural feature of modern economies. Ignoring it in the name of safety is not conservative. It is unprepared. Those who preserve wealth in changing cycles do not cling to static value. They position capital in systems that evolve. By prioritizing inflation-resistant vehicles over nominal safety, investors protect not just money, but the power that money represents over time. Use staged deployment instead of all-or-nothing decisions. One of the most common errors in capital management is treating allocation as a single event. Investors wait, build large cash positions, and then feel pressure to deploy everything at once. This approach increases emotional stress, timing risk, and regret. Staged deployment exists to eliminate these weaknesses. Markets do not reward precision. They reward consistency. Attempting to deploy capital at the perfect moment assumes a level of control that does not exist. Even experienced investors cannot reliably time exact bottoms or optimal entry points. Staged deployment accepts this reality and works with it rather than against it. At its core, staged deployment is about discipline, not prediction. Capital is allocated gradually according to predefined rules, not feelings. This could be time-based, price-based, or condition-based, but the principle is the same: reduce dependency on any single decision. When capital is introduced in stages, mistakes become manageable instead of catastrophic. This approach also changes investor behavior. All-or-nothing decisions create hesitation. Every market movement feels significant because so much is at stake. Staged deployment lowers psychological pressure. Each allocation is smaller, controlled, and intentional. This calm improves decision quality over time. In uncertain environments, this method becomes even more valuable. Economic transitions produce mixed signals. Some indicators suggest caution, others suggest opportunity. Waiting for alignment often leads to inaction. Staged deployment allows participation without overcommitment. You move forward while preserving flexibility. Another advantage is adaptability. When capital is deployed gradually, new information can be integrated without panic. If conditions improve, allocation continues. If conditions deteriorate, deployment can pause or adjust. This responsiveness is impossible when capital is committed all at once. Staged deployment also protects against narrative-driven mistakes. Markets are heavily influenced by stories, forecasts, and consensus opinions. These narratives change quickly. Investors who act in one large move are exposed to being wrong at the worst possible moment. Gradual allocation reduces exposure to any single narrative. Importantly, staged deployment is not indecision. It is structured action. The rules are defined in advance. Capital is not waiting aimlessly. It is following a process. This distinction separates professionals from amateurs. Professionals rely on systems. Amateurs rely on conviction. In 2026, volatility is not a temporary condition. It is a feature. Investors who demand certainty before acting will remain sidelined. Those who deploy capital in stages remain engaged while controlling risk. Over full cycles, this approach consistently outperforms emotional lump sum behavior. There is also a compounding benefit. Earlier stages begin working sooner, even while later stages remain liquid. This balances opportunity cost and risk exposure. Capital is neither fully idle nor fully exposed. It is transitioning with intent. Staged deployment requires patience and humility, patience to accept that returns accrue over time, not instantly. Humility to accept that no single entry defines success. This mindset removes ego from investing and replaces it with process. This approach applies beyond markets. Businesses scale in stages. Operations expand in phases. Strong systems are built incrementally. Capital allocation should follow the same logic. Sudden, total commitments increase fragility. Gradual commitments build resilience. All or nothing decisions feel decisive, but they are often driven by emotion. Staged deployment feels restrained, but it is strategically aggressive. It advances while protecting downside. It accepts uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. Those who preserve and grow wealth over long periods rarely make dramatic moves. They make consistent ones. By using staged deployment, capital is introduced to opportunity without surrendering control. In uncertain times, this balance is not optional. It is essential. Maintain flexibility without sacrificing capital efficiency. Flexibility is often misunderstood. Many investors believe flexibility comes from holding large amounts of cash. In reality, excessive cash reduces flexibility by locking capital into inactivity. True flexibility comes from structure, not stagnation. It allows capital to move, adapt, and respond without being trapped or wasted. Capital efficiency means every dollar is positioned to serve a purpose. It may generate return, preserve value, or provide optionality, but it must justify its position. When flexibility is achieved by holding idle cash, efficiency is lost. The portfolio appears ready, but in practice, it is underperforming its potential. The disciplined approach is to build flexibility into the allocation itself. This means owning assets that can be adjusted, rebalanced, or repurposed as conditions change. Liquidity does not need to sit entirely in cash. It can exist within instruments that retain access while still participating in the system. Flexibility also comes from diversification across time horizons. Some capital is positioned for long-term company and pounding, some for medium-term adjustments. Some remain short-term and liquid. When these layers are clearly defined, the portfolio can respond to opportunity or stress without forced decisions. Investors who sacrifice efficiency for flexibility often do so out of fear. They want the comfort of knowing they can act at any moment. But this comfort has a cost. Idle capital quietly loses relevance while waiting for a scenario that may never arrive. Over time, this habit erodes overall performance more than most bad investments. Efficient flexibility requires planning. Entry and exit rules must exist before they are needed. When capital can be reallocated according to predefined criteria, flexibility becomes operational rather than emotional. This prevents panic selling and impulsive buying. In 2026, rapid shifts in policy, technology, and capital flows will reward those who can reposition without dismantling their portfolios. Investors who rely on cash hoarding will struggle to keep pace. They will either act too late or deploy inefficiently. Those with built-in flexibility will move calmly and decisively. Another aspect of flexibility is optionality. Efficient portfolios maintain exposure to multiple paths forward. They are not dependent on a single outcome. This is achieved through varied asset functions, not excessive cash. Optionality embedded in productive assets is more powerful than optionality created by waiting. Flexibility also protects against opportunity cost. When capital is already working, even imperfectly, it remains connected to growth. It can be shifted rather than restarted. This continuity matters over long cycles. Restarting from cash often means re-entering at higher prices and reduced leverage. Maintaining efficiency does not mean maximizing risk. It means minimizing waste. Waste occurs when capital sits without direction. Efficient flexibility ensures that even conservative positions contribute something, whether income, protection, or strategic positioning. High-level investors design portfolios like systems, not storage units. Systems are built to adapt without losing function. Storage prioritizes preservation but neglects performance. Over time, systems outperform storage because they evolve. This mindset requires letting go of the illusion of perfect readiness. No portfolio is prepared for every scenario. The goal is not total control, it is controlled adaptability. Capital must be positioned to respond, not to hide. By maintaining flexibility without sacrificing efficiency, investors avoid the false choice between safety and growth. They achieve both through structure. In 2026, this balance will separate disciplined capital managers from passive holders. Wealth is not preserved by standing on the sidelines. It is preserved by staying engaged without being exposed unnecessarily. Efficient flexibility is the mechanism that makes this possible. Review cash positions as strategy, not habit. Cash should never exist in a portfolio by default. When it does, it becomes a habit rather than a strategy. Habits feel comfortable because they go unquestioned. Strategy requires review, intention, and adjustment. In 2026, failing to review cash positions deliberately will quietly undermine otherwise disciplined portfolios. Most investors accumulate cash gradually. Profits are taken, opportunities are delayed, distributions sit unallocated. Over time, cash balances grow without a clear purpose. Because nothing negative happens immediately, this state is accepted as prudent. In reality, it is unmanaged capital. Strategic investors treat cash like any other asset. It must justify its allocation. Why does it exist? What role does it serve? How long is it expected to remain there? If these questions cannot be answered clearly, the position is not strategic, it is passive. Reviewing cash as strategy means setting explicit rules, a defined percentage, a defined time horizon, or a defined trigger for redeployment. Without these, cash becomes a holding area for indecision. With them, cash becomes a tool. This review process should be periodic, not reactive. Waiting for market stress to reassess cash guarantees emotional decisions. Scheduled reviews enforce objectivity. They allow capital to be repositioned calmly, based on logic rather than headlines. Another critical aspect is opportunity awareness. Cash that sits too long often misses gradual shifts. Markets rarely move from bad to good overnight. They transition. Strategic reviews identify these transitions early, allowing partial redeployment before consensus forms. Treating cash as strategy also improves accountability. If a position underperforms, the reason is clear. It was held for a defined purpose. Habitual cash has no defense. It simply existed. Over long horizons, this lack of accountability compounds into lost potential. In 2026, structural change will favor those who manage capital actively but calmly. Reviewing cash positions does not mean trading frequently. It means refusing to let capital drift. Drift is the enemy of long-term performance. Cash held intentionally can still be powerful. Cash held passively becomes a liability. The difference is review. Strategic investors respect cash, but they do not ignore it. Wealth compounds when every allocation is conscious. Reviewing cash as strategy ensures capital remains aligned with reality, not routine. Holding cash in 2026 is not neutral. It is a strategic choice with long-term consequences. Discipline is not about standing still. It is about positioning capital with intent, clarity, and patience. Those who understand this early protect their portfolios quietly, while others learn too late.